Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to give it one more minute for everyone to join, and then we'll jump in. And thank you again for making time. We're really excited about this launch today. All right, thank you everyone for joining us today. We are thrilled to be launching this prototype of the biodiversity theme in the Navigating Impact project today. Before we kick off, I'm going to just give a little bit of housekeeping details. First is that if you are not currently speaking on the line, if you would please mute yourselves, it helps keep the audio a bit clearer for everyone. And the second point is that we are recording this. And so we're excited to be able to share this for folks who were not able to join, whether because of schedule or because of time zones. And finally, we are looking forward to a really great question and answer session towards the end of this presentation. And so if as you have questions as we go along, please do send those in the questions box. It should be in your the options that you have in the sidebar. And we'll look forward to jumping into those as soon as we get there. So I'm going to kick us off now, and I'd just like to say up front that it has been an incredible honor to work with the team, the WWF-Netherlands team and Arcadis on this conversation, as well as the 85+ of you that have been involved in the development of this theme. I was struck this morning when I was reading the news, and one of the top headlines here in the US, I'm based in New York on Canarsie Lenape land. One of the top headlines is that they are getting ready to announce that 23 species are being recommended to be moved to the extinction list or the endangerment list. And that was a sadly timed, but relevantly timed note on how important this work is and how glad we are to be working with experts like WWF, Netherlands, and Arcadis to move this forward for the impact investing community. My job here is to give just a little bit of background so that I can then hand it over to those teams to go much more deeply into the specifics. Before I do that, can everyone see my screen? Seems like maybe not.
Yes, we can.
You can. Okay, perfect. Wonderful. So I'll give a little bit of background here then. So I'm coming to you from the Global Impact Investing Network. And just for context, our organization, also known as the GIIN, is the global champion of impact investing. We focus very specifically on increasing both the scale and the effectiveness of impact investing around the world. And as part of that effort, we manage IRIS Plus. IRIS Plus is, of course, the generally accepted system for measuring and managing and optimizing impact. And so what we're talking about today is building into the IRIS Plus system a theme and guidance for investors who want to be measuring, managing, and optimizing to preserve and support biodiversity. IRIS Plus is used by a lot of folks worldwide. So just some quick numbers here. This is a little bit out of date in the sense that we now have over 20,000 unique users, and some of those numbers would be a little bit higher at this point. The point of sharing this is that the work that these teams and all of our stakeholders who have helped build this theme have done is going to reach a lot of people and a lot of geographies, and so we're proud to be putting it out there.
Sorry to interrupt, Lissa. I think your slides are not moving, so we still see the started slide.
Okay. Just a moment. How about now?
Now we don't see any slides.
We see you.
Okay. Good. Okay, I'm going to take myself off of video. Perhaps that will help. How about now?
Yes, it's working.
Okay. So then I'll just screen through those last slides. So Global Impact Investing Network, IRIS Plus, and here is the global reach and scale, and I'll keep moving to keep us on time. IRIS Plus is built in consultation with a lot of different stakeholders from a lot of different angles. You can see here a couple of examples of the folks that we've worked with in building this system. The idea being that if we're going to build a system and support an industry and really understanding the impact that we're creating, we have to test it from as many angles as possible and be open to as much feedback as possible to really get there. IRIS is, of course, built in alignment with over 50 standards and frameworks, and you can see a couple there. A lot of our metrics for this theme are based on the IUCN's work, GHG protocol, and others. IRIS Plus offers a lot of different things, but a couple of the key features are core metric sets, which we'll talk about in a little bit when Johan chats about the metrics we've been thinking through on this theme in evidence base, and then practical resources and summaries of how impact can happen through impact investments. There are a lot of themes in IRIS Plus. As you can see here, we have about 12 of them that are already launched in the system. We have another 4 that are in development currently, and a couple more that we'll be developing over the coming year and years. There will be an ask at the end of this webinar for anyone that's interested to help us build those next couple of themes, and so we'll share information on that. There were over 85 stakeholders in the development of this theme. I've just given a quick snapshot of some of them here, but we really had a diversity of folks taking a look at this work and helping us understand both what's practical and what's rigorous and how we can best drive the industry forward. This is the process that we use to build this theme, and I just wanted to anchor us briefly in where we are here. Today, we are at the nexus of the Navigating Impact Project process, which is about theme development and prototyping, and moving into a standardization and public comment phase. So for the past, I think 6 to 8 months, we have gone through a number of different processes and testing phases with the WWF-Netherlands and Arcadis teams to really research this space, draft and gather feedback from the folks who have been involved in the stakeholder group. After this launch, we'll be sharing this with the industry today. We're excited to be doing that. And we'll then move into a phase where we push it out to an even broader set of the industry. We'll put it in the IRIS Plus format and then seek really broad feedback from those of you on the line and many others as far as what works, what doesn't work, and what other guidance we need to write in order for this to be most useful. After all of that, it's launched in IRIS Plus, and we're aiming to do that by Q2 or Q3 of next year. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Aaron to jump in.
Yes, hi everyone, and thanks Lissa for having me in this great webinar. I heard you introducing some depressing facts, which you just read in the news, and I'm just going to add some more in the next slide. At WWF every other year is publishing its Living Planet Index. I don't know, can you see it, or is it on the next slide? I think, which you see here. And the current numbers are really not looking well. So you see here that if you look globally on the global vertebrate species index, it has gone down about 70% since 1970. And when you look at the freshwater species, it's even worse. So it's 84% have gone extinct, which means that only we're left with 16% of all freshwater species that were existing by 1970. So the curve is really going down, and I think WWF, but also many others, are really keen to bend that curve and bend that curve positively. And we have a very short timeline to do that. As WWF, we have set a target by 2030. The globe should be positive, nature positive. And we also realize that with business as usual, we're not going to reach that goal. And so traditionally, we have tried to influence corporate behavior. We have tried to influence governments to set better policies on environmental biodiversity. And we have engaged local communities to protect their livelihoods in the places where we work. But despite all these efforts, the curve is still going down. So that's why WWF has started this bankable nature solutions program, which you see on the next slide. And that program is really an initiative to engage companies, engage investors to identify bankable projects and companies which have a positive impact on nature. That work is ongoing for about 3 years now. There are a couple of funds under this initiative. One of it is the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development. And in all these programs, we have gathered more and more experience on also measuring impact on biodiversity and starting to quantify that impact. So that is also the reason why, Lissa, when you called us and asked us, do you want to work with the GIIN on developing this set of metrics, we were very enthusiastic to work with you. So that's where our cooperation started, and that's what the next slide is about. So we said, okay, so what goals when it comes to biodiversity should we focus on? And we distinguished really 3 goals. One goal is really to address the direct drivers of loss of biodiversity, and you can think about this in terms of climate change, pollution, land conversion, and natural resources use. All these drivers cause degradation of biodiversity. So if we can identify projects that reverse these trends, then yeah, we really would wish to develop some impact metrics around these. Then the other goal is really restore nature. So not only stop degradation, but also help restore nature. And then the third goal is a more opportunity-driven goal around opportunities that we see emerging in the investment space, such as nature-based solutions that require really tailor-made metrics. But as Lissa showed in the first slide, there are already many themes with combined metrics existing within IRIS Plus, and some of them have some metrics related to biodiversity as well. So just to name a few is sustainable agriculture, climate change mitigation, sustainable forestry, and sustainable water management. So what we didn't want to do is really redo all that work, but we really wanted to create new biodiversity themes that are additional to the existing themes. So what we did is we, in consultation with the 85 stakeholders mentioned earlier, we identified 4 themes. One is terrestrial ecosystem protection and restoration. The second one is marine ecosystem conservation and restoration. Then we have nature-based solutions and green infrastructure. Then salt and freshwater aquaculture and fisheries. So what I will do in the coming slides is just give a couple of examples of investments that we have identified already. And what we've done is really learn from these investments and feed these learning experiences into the metrics, which Johan will present after my presentation. So the first slide is about terrestrial ecosystem protection and restoration. Coming back to the LPI, Living Planet Index statistics, which I shared earlier, when it comes to terrestrial ecosystems, we've seen a decline in terrestrial species of 38% since 1970. And we also noted that only 25% of terrestrial ecosystems have been untouched, so 75% have been modified in the past decades. So what the example on your slide is currently doing is a sustainable forestry project in Uganda. The Dutch Fund for Climate and Development is working with a company called the New Forest Company, which is really a sustainable forest company. We are looking at a 5 million investment in-depth instruments to this company to expand the sustainable forest areas around the protected area. So what this project shows is that we're not only investing in sustainable forestry, but we're also creating a buffer zone around a protected area. In that way, restore and protect nature, while also providing income to local smallholders that are landowners in this buffer zone, and also assist these smallholders in increasing their income, partly with the sales of timber, but also with the sales of carbon credits that are coming from that project. The second project which I wanted to share with you is the Blue Finance project in the Dominican Republic, if I'm not mistaken. Is that the next slide? Yes. This project is really trying to address the decline in coral reef degradation. In the past decades, coral reef have been halved in land surface, and also the fish species have declined with 34%. On top of that, the value that is stored in the oceans in terms of food production and other ecosystem services is tremendous. I think the current number is over 100 billion euros a year. So what the Blue Finance project is really doing is setting up a fund which is going to invest in capital expenditures and working capital for the foundation Punta Cana and Fundamar. The current fundraising is at about $9 million, and the target is $25 million. And what the foundation Punta Cana and Fundamar are really doing is to identify sustainable business cases that generate revenue to protect, to help restore marine protected areas, and at the same time provide income for local businesses and local communities. Mirova and Altilia are cornerstone investors in this fund, and I believe that the fund is already in operation for 2 to 3 years. Next, please. Then the third theme is nature-based solutions and green infrastructure. Nature-based solutions is a really emerging theme because with climate change, we acknowledge that the existence of nature-based solutions, think about mangroves, think about river floodplains, think about wetlands, they can provide an instrumental role in hedging local communities against the negative impact of climate change. So you can think about droughts, floods, and heat waves. It has been estimated that currently the existing ecosystem services that are generated from nature-based solutions amount over $170 billion. And so we think that by attracting private capital to nature-based solutions, some companies can capitalize on these values coming from nature-based solutions, and at the same time generate revenue. So one example that we've looked at is the protection of natural resources in the Walloon region in Belgium. It's an investment by EIB in a water company called SPGE. It's a combination of grey and green infrastructure. So you could think about constructed wetlands that clean the wastewater coming from industry and households, clean the water with the aim to improve the water quality in the surface in the rivers in the Walloon region, and with the aim to also get some indigenous species back, like the mussel that you see here on the picture. So I should make a note that this is a public sector investment, which could then also be interesting for private sector investors when they are distributed in the shape of green bonds or other green equities. We know that nature-based solutions are still very much in the space of the public sector, but there could be also public-private partnerships that could catalyze these type of investments. Next slide. And then the last example which I wanted to share is one in the salt and freshwater aquaculture and fisheries theme. 90% of the global fish stocks are currently overexploited. They represent $401 billion annual global value per year. So there's really a need to sustain global fisheries with better investments. So that's exactly what the Meloy Fund is doing. I believe we have a speaker of the Meloy Fund later on, so I will not dwell too long on this example. But what I really like about this fund is that it is aggregating smaller investments into sustainable fishery companies in the Philippines and Indonesia to a larger fund. So it's really an interesting aggregation model. Currently, the size is 70 million. And it's also interesting to note that FMO, the same development bank that is investing in the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development, has an equity stake of 5 million in this fund. So I think, that's my overview of some interesting examples that have fed into the metrics. And I think now it's time for Johan to share the metrics that have emerged out of these examples. And thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you very much, Aaron. So my name is Johan Lammerant. First checking if you can understand me clearly and well, because I'm calling in with my mobile phone. I had some technical issues with GoToWebinar. Can you understand me well?
Johan, we can hear you well.
Great. Fantastic. Okay, thanks. So I work within Arcadis as a lead expert on natural capital and biodiversity. And in addition to that, I want to mention that since 2017, I am leading the work stream on methodologies and metrics for biodiversity measurement in a corporate context and context of financial institutions for the EU Business and Biodiversity Platform. And in that context, in that position, we've done a lot of assessments on currently available biodiversity measurement approaches for businesses and financial institutions over the past years. And we know quite well the pros and cons of the different approaches and the available metrics also for biodiversity. So I think it's useful that you are aware of that. Now, on the metrics, you can have very nice strategic objectives, but of course a key challenge is to measure biodiversity performance and your progress to targets. And so at a certain moment you will need to demonstrate that you are really compliant to your strategic objectives. So you will need measurement approaches. Now, measuring biodiversity is not that simple. It's one of the most challenging issues when you want to measure natural capital. Greenhouse gas emissions and measuring greenhouse gas emissions is, let's say, quite simple compared to biodiversity measurements, for the simple reason that greenhouse gas emissions is only one indicator. For biodiversity, it's more complicated. Over the past years, I have been working with many businesses and financial institutions, and all of them had the same question. Give us one single biodiversity metric that we can work with. But nowadays, fortunately, there is increased agreement and acknowledgement that biodiversity cannot be captured within one single metric. Therefore, we are very much in favor of applying dashboard type approaches where you have different metrics next to one another, because each of these metrics reveals information on particular aspects of biodiversity. And I will come back to that when we discuss some of the metrics that we propose. So the slide that you have in front of you shows the core metrics that we propose for the 4 strategic objectives, and they are indicated also with color codes corresponding with the strategic objectives. But as you see, many more additional metrics which often focus on particular aspects of biodiversity. So you can really, you are really free to tailor the selection of indicators and metrics to the specific purposes of your specific context, let's say. In terms of the core metrics, let's have a short introduction to the first 4. And you will see that biodiversity assessment and biodiversity footprinting are among the so-called metrics. Of course, we can discuss about is it a metric or is it an approach? We have mixed up a little bit approaches with metrics, but in the narrative behind each of these metrics, you will clearly see how we combine overall approaches like assessment and footprinting with specific metrics that are suitable for these approaches. So assessment is in fact any type of measurement of biodiversity condition in the area of scope, where you do a biodiversity assessment to inform yourself about the state of the art, the current condition, or also once you have applied a project, once you have implemented the project, the resulting condition of biodiversity. So you do an assessment. You can do that by means of field surveys. You can do that by means of modeling. It's up to you. There are different approaches possible. We tried to include in the narrative, in the description of each of these core metrics, also what we call business applications, and it has been called business contexts. These are a little bit synonyms of each other. So for what particular purposes you are measuring? You are not measuring just for the fun of measuring because it's very expensive. You do this with a particular objective. So one of these objectives is, for instance, screening biodiversity risks or screening opportunities in terms of ecosystem restoration. Another application is comparing different options, where you invest in that area or another area, or in that company or another company. Tracking progress to targets is another application. So we try to make this clear because based on experience, we see that different biodiversity measurement approaches are suitable for different types of business contexts. A second overall approach is biodiversity footprinting. Biodiversity footprinting is often used at a product level. You all know life cycle analysis approaches, which give an idea about the environmental performance of a product, but you can also apply it at the level of an organization. So in fact, footprinting gives you an idea about the biodiversity performance compared to the undisturbed state. It's not the most accurate type of measurement because it's based on modeling, but it's fine for particular business applications or business contexts like benchmarking. When you have a portfolio of investment opportunities or companies and you want to rank them in terms of biodiversity performance, you can apply biodiversity footprinting approaches. Biodiversity footprinting approaches often rely on metrics like mean species abundance, or PDF, so mean species abundance is MSA, PDF, potentially disappeared fraction of species. And both of these metrics give you a score between 0 and 1. In the case of mean species abundance, the 0 score means that there is no biodiversity value anymore. A score of 1 is that the pristine state, let's say, of biodiversity, so the maximum value that you can achieve is present. The same for PDF, but it's the other way around there. Until now, a side note is that biodiversity footprinting approaches can be applied for terrestrial applications, but are hard to apply for marine applications. Another one is ecosystem services. I will hurry on a little bit. Ecosystem services is a particular aspect of biodiversity and requires a totally different approach in terms of measurement. It's often complicated. It requires expert advice. You have many types of ecosystem services, but the advantage of measuring ecosystem services is that you can quantify it sometimes in monetary terms. So some companies, some users are interested in having everything expressed in monetary terms. So, and another important advantage of working with ecosystem services is that it makes the link with social issues. Then threatened species is obviously another one. It's also focusing on one particular aspect of biodiversity, threatened species, vulnerable species, protected species, but it's not covering the total dimension of biodiversity, but it's very useful in some cases. And then we have two other core metrics, one for marine, one for freshwater. A final remark, and then I want to conclude, is that this whole field of biodiversity metrics is evolving very rapidly these days due to all kinds of international developments on standardization, on target setting, on disclosure. Standardization, we are in the middle of a process of preparing an international standard for biodiversity measurement with the ALIGN, the EU-funded ALIGN project. Target setting, you will all know the CBD process, the Science-Based Targets for Nature process. And in terms of disclosure, we'll have, for instance, the TNFD and the future CSR Directive of Europe. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Johan. Really appreciate it, and some really interesting thoughts shared there. I'm going to keep us moving, and what we're going to transition to is actually getting some investor perspectives on biodiversity and how it works within their portfolios. So I'm going to invite Arjan to speak first. Arjan, would you share a little bit more about what ACTIAM is doing within this space?
Do you hear me now?
I do, yep, got it.
Okay, great. Yes, thank you for giving me the opportunity to say a little bit more about how ACTIAM is approaching biodiversity. Maybe first as a background to ACTIAM, it's a Dutch asset manager, mid to small size asset manager. All our funds are categorized as sustainable funds. We also have, well, I'm personally working in the sustainability and strategy team of ACTIAM, which focuses basically on equity and fixed income portfolios and screening of companies and engagement with companies within these portfolios. ACTIAM also has an impact investment team and a number of impact funds. For now, they are not particularly focusing on biodiversity, but more on microfinance and sanitation and energy transition. But we are looking into ways in how restoration finance can also become one of the themes for in one of our impact funds. Biodiversity is an important topic already for quite a long time. We already for I think at least 5 years see it as the next big topic after climate. But luckily, when focusing on climate, we partly also focus on biodiversity. But there are many areas that aren't covered when we focus on the climate impacts of our investments. So basically, in my day-to-day work, we screen companies on how they deal with biodiversity and what's their impact, what may they have a positive impact, and we have quite some engagements ongoing related to biodiversity. Most of them are not directly focusing on biodiversity, as it is more an umbrella term, but we're focusing them on the drivers that cause biodiversity loss. So we have programs on climate, we have programs on deforestation and land use change, programs also on water, and both within our engagements and in our screening of biodiversity is approached from these angles. On the other end, we also would like to maybe one step back. In our screening, the indicators that are given in the GIIN are interesting and relevant but they basically show what companies have been doing until this moment. And for selecting companies, you and I guess also for selecting projects, you would like to know what are they going to do. So we also need more information about targets and programs and and monitoring programs in order to assure that they are dealing with biodiversity in a serious way. For reporting, I think that the indicators that have just been presented by Johan are very relevant, and it is very good that we get a consensus of the metrics that need to be reported, and having consensus on these metrics also helps us in our engagements with companies to show them on which metrics they should improve transparency. As Johan said, that still it's quite difficult often to measure. We have quite a lot of information on these underlying drivers of biodiversity loss, but these higher level metrics such as footprints, and so that's where we hope that we can make quick progress over the coming years, and that's why we also joined some of these working groups Johan was talking about, and we're also part of the PBAF, the Partnership on Biodiversity Accounting for Financials, in order to try to develop such a metric. And also develop these metrics in such a way that they are really company specific, because we have not reached that point yet. We know which sectors are causing biodiversity loss. We have quite a good view on the areas where companies cause the largest biodiversity losses, but pinpointing it directly to a company, that's still the missing link for, I think, for many of us. So I think that the metrics in the GIIN database are very, very relevant, and I hope that also in the coming years, it's not only that companies start to report on that, but also the data providers which supply all the data to investors as ourselves, that they also step up. I have the impression that they are still waiting a little bit on publishing more information about biodiversity, and I hope that the metrics that are mentioned here may also help them to improve the data that they provide to us.
Thank you so much, Arjan. That was wonderful and really helpful. I'm going to keep us moving in the interest of time and having time for questions, which I see are already coming in. As a reminder, if you have questions you'd like to pose to the panelists, please send them in through the questions box here. With that, can I invite Veronica to step forward, and we'd love to hear a little bit more about the Meloy Fund.
Hi everyone, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. So my name is Veronica, I'm the head of Impact and ESG at the Meloy Fund. So the Meloy Fund is an impact investment fund targeting SMEs sourcing from coastal communities in both in Indonesia and the Philippines. So we provide equity, loan and trade financing to these SMEs, and all our investees are eligible for technical assistance grant funding to further help achieve Meloy Fund's 2 key impact goals, which is basically the number of household members positively impacted and the hectare of seascape under improved management. And we're also actually in the process of identifying additional sub-metrics to allow us to better define the impact of our investees. So we're actually really glad to see GIIN, IRIS Plus, and all the other partners on this call that there's that a larger focus on fisheries and aquaculture, starting from this biodiversity metrics. So in terms of like investment focus, as one of the previous panelists was talking about, the rapid decrease in fish stock, particularly on the wild caught, as well as then the role of aquaculture and mariculture. So these 2 are kind of like a big focus for Meloy Fund. Generally, we use the IFC performance standards for our due diligence, and particularly for wild caught, we have an additional minimum fishery standard looking at gear, size of the fish being caught, as well as then compliance with local and national regulations, so which may have a direct impact being the driver of losses of certain species. And also we look at whether these investments are either part of a fisheries improvement project, which is kind of the pathway towards a Marine Stewardship Council certification. And also we further evaluate where the FIP is at and how far along are they in terms of their stock assessment, and whether there is a harvest strategy or management in place to ensure there is recovery of the fish stock. And in terms of aquaculture, we look at the intersection with coastal ecosystems and how these businesses are either protecting or restoring mangrove ecosystems, this minimizing the usage of wild-caught resources, and do not contribute further to pollution of our oceans, and where possible, how it serves as a viable alternative livelihood for coastal fishers to reduce the dependence on wild-caught resources. So in terms of kind of 2 examples of the investments in this area of focus. So Peter Greta is an octopus seaweed processor, and alongside their buyers and the fishes that they source from, we're initiating a fishery improvement project along with other partners that are already working in octopus, hopefully towards a national FIP in Indonesia. And here we're looking at how the fishes are impacting the octopus stock, as well as then on endangered, threatened and protected species within that fishery. Kind of the number of biodiversity metrics that have been suggested, I think, is a very interesting kind of additional elements and metrics that we can add on top of FIP, because the FIP kind of look at the impact on the ETP kind of as part of the FIP, but I think looking at ecosystem services, kind of biodiversity footprint are definitely interesting ones that that we can add in the future as well. And the other kind of investment that we want to highlight is we're increasingly investing kind of in enabling technology, and PT Cultiva, for example, is a traceability company, and they have primarily worked in the terrestrial space, and we invested in them to bring their technology over to the marine space, particularly for seaweed and aquaculture. What we're particularly excited about Cultiva's technology is their ability to provide direct e-payment and microloans to fishers and farmers, but as well as to help seaweed and aquaculture companies to scale, for example, to be able to trace their supply and measure impact, number one, in terms of minimizing any potential harm, whether that's seaweed in terms of on ecosystems like seagrass and corals, as well as then maximizing the environmental and biodiversity impact of seaweed farming, particularly within an MPA system. So I think in terms of biodiversity metrics, that's not something that we kind of are actively looking at overall, but I think within, for example, kind of the hectare seascape improved management, we can add additional kind of sub-metrics that could help us to better define what that means, and biodiversity is kind of within that. Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. I am going to attempt something relatively complicated for me, which is to turn off the screen and to invite all of our panelists onto video. We are going to shift into some of the questions that have come in so that we can all have a conversation together. Okay, and I see a couple of us. Hi, everyone. We've gotten some great questions coming in. I'm going to start with, if I can find them again, with a pretty high level one, and this is for the WWF, Netherlands and Arcadis teams. There was a question that came in around some of the priorities you had to make in creating the team. There's a lot of spaces and sectors where biodiversity is relevant. Was there anything that you couldn't include as you created this team? And if so, how did you make those choices?
Lissa, we have some sound issues on this side. So could you quickly summarize the question, please?
Yeah, the question is, was there anything that you could not include in this theme? And how did you make those choices?
Anything that I also want to acknowledge the rest of the WWF team. So I have Nicolas Poolen sitting next to me, and we have Avital from Meijeren, who is also on video. But let me kick off. I think, as Johan also was alluding to, it's at this moment, given the lack of data and the lack of science, it's very hard to quantify a direct impact between an investment and biodiversity, right? So we can't connect, let's say, forestry projects to the abundance of species that are generated from that project, given the time lag between the action and the impact, but also given the issues around attribution. So that is something that is still, of course, on our wish list, but that will take probably, well, I would say a decade, yeah, till we have that data right. So I think the metrics that we have now is a really good start. And as Johan was saying, there are numerous parallel developments ongoing that will hopefully contribute to making this an even more solid framework with the data that we have currently available. So Nico, is there anything you want to add?
No, that was clear. So Nicolas from the WWF team, I'm sitting opposite from Aaron, so the volume is coming through the same speaker, but we're here with two persons. Nothing big to add there, Aaron. I think the objective here was to show what is out there that impact investors can start using tomorrow, and we have seen that there's a lot out there, but there's obviously a lot of things still on our wish list. And that is what we also are working on in these initiatives that have been called out already through the Align project, through PBAF, through other developments also from a regulatory perspective. But yeah, I think the good news is there's a good starters kit out there right now that impact investors can start working with. So that was yeah, similar to what Aaron said.
Wonderful, thank you. There's a question here for Veronica specifically, and it's on the two companies that you shared. The question is, what is the main source of revenue when you're investing in those companies? Are you looking to help them increase production, alternative sources of revenue, tourism? What does that look like for you?
So typically, most of the investment are seafood processors. So it is their source of revenue would be buying fish and then processing them, and a lot of the times exporting. So what we want to be able to make sure is that's being caught sustainably, whether in the gear, whether in the size, and then in the management of that fish stock, which obviously doesn't just involve one company. So a lot of the times we do have to work with multiple stakeholders and kind of key in on existing initiatives on the ground, and then also engaging the buyers. So it's kind of, various factors that kind of help, these small SMEs that are in the middle to be able to say that they want to source sustainably too. And that kind of message kind of gets sent down the line. And then a lot of the times we find that, even with the SME processor, they may be sending certain signals to the traders, and that may not get to the fishers. And that's why, for example, with BP Cultiva, which is a tech company, so they work with different companies to roll out their traceability solutions. So their kind of revenue model is either a SaaS or kind of consulting. And for them in particular, kind of their ability to then be able to give direct payments to fishers that really kind of help, change the game in terms of making sure fishers know that if I catch better quality, bigger fish, I get rewarded for that.
Excellent, thank you. I realize that this is turning into kind of a lightning round, so I'm going to throw out a couple and we can tackle as many as we can. There's a couple of questions here from Fernando and Sydney and a couple of others around the specific tools and methodologies that someone might use to do these measurements. And so maybe I'll bucket these questions. Is there a recommendation on which tools are particularly useful to map biodiversity on an annual basis to capture footprint and ecosystem services? Is there a place within the theme where we provide recommendations on that? And if so, could you name a couple of them? And I'll send that maybe first to Johan, but then Arjan would also be interested in which ones you're using, if that's something you can share.
Okay, if I can start, in terms of recommendations of approaches, it's really very, we need to be very cautious to recommend specific approaches because we mapped all these approaches, or at least many of them, the most prominent of the available approaches for biodiversity measurement. We mapped them according to the type of business contexts in which they can be used, and also according to the what we call organizational focus level. So is the approach more suitable for project level assessments or for corporate level or more for product level or even for portfolio? So the results showed very clearly that these approaches are really, some of these approaches are really niche approaches, so covering a particular combination of a business context and an organizational focus area. So it's really hard to say, okay, this approach is really recommendable because it covers it all and it's really very solid and so on. As long as there is no international accepted biodiversity measurement standards, then it's even more dangerous to say, okay, let's use that approach or another one. The same applies to the type of metrics. But I would say there is already quite some information available. The documentation that you have in IRIS Plus has a very interesting links to that documentation, and I would also say don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. There are already very suitable approaches. There are already biodiversity data, and just give it a start. Yep.
Thank you. And Arjan, anything that you would add? Can't hear you for some reason. Let me try to unmute you.
Now I'm unmuted. Thank you. Yeah, the way we are dealing with biodiversity at ACTIAM is, of course, very much related to what an asset manager is doing. That has to deal with a couple of thousands of companies, has to screen all these companies also on how they are dealing with biodiversity. So if I look at it from a screening perspective and for selecting companies, then it's not so much biodiversity, which is the main focus, but the drivers causing biodiversity loss for us. So there we look at the carbon footprint, the water footprint, and yeah, also trying to have, and also the things related to deforestation. But of course, also their data is still largely missing. For reporting, we are also eager to have a biodiversity footprinting type of measure, which is why we're also part of PBAF, and there are some examples where their BFFI method, the biodiversity footprint for financial institutions, and where that's used for portfolios. But I think there are in France are also examples where the corporate biodiversity footprint is used to look on at the portfolio level at biodiversity changes per year. But still, those methods are not far from perfect. Also on how they deal with the year-on-year changes, how they deal with one-off large losses of biodiversity due to deforestation, and how that's compared with the annual changes due to, for example, well, water pollution or so. So there are still many challenges ongoing there, for which I don't unfortunately have an answer yet. And that also because of this, these data gaps, we initiated this project with a satellite imagery company to get more data on deforestation. And I understood that there are more of these satellite imagery companies that also have quite good knowledge of the areas where certain companies are producing, or which companies are sourcing from particular areas. We also would like to, are starting also a new initiative where, based on bioacoustics, we would try to learn a bit more the relation between species abundance and species diversity and land use intensity, in order to, well, for hoping that that more innovation will come over the next few years with new measures and new innovative ways of getting these data.
Wonderful, thank you. There's a question here that I'm actually going to ask our panelists to take via chat. There's a question here on what are all of the different initiatives that are currently happening. So one that was mentioned was Aligned. You've talked about PBAF. If everyone on the screen would be open to just chatting, whichever ones you're aware of that are interesting and doing good work in this space, that would be great. And with that, I'm going to ask you all to go off of video. Thank you so much for answering these questions. It's been a really great discussion. And I will share the next couple of steps. So there was one last question that came up that that I think actually is a great transition into this next section and the final section. The question was something around all of the metrics presented here, as far as we could see in the core, were focused really heavily on conservation, and they didn't speak to the rights of smallholder farmers and small-scale fisheries. They didn't talk about some of the equity elements that would be really important in thinking about projects within these spaces. And so that is actually what we're hoping, that type of feedback is what we're hoping to get from you all in the next couple of months. I'll show just now on the screen where we're headed. So you've already seen this graphic, and as you know, we are here today. The next step, though, is for us to get your thoughts and the thoughts of the industry as a whole. Where do these metrics work well? Where do we need to provide more guidance? And what are we missing? In the broader scheme of this project, we assume that that there are gaps and that we're all going to be learning together quite a bit in the coming months. So we'll come back to you in the next couple of months and let us know in the follow-up survey if you'd like to be on this outreach list. And we'll ask for exactly that. What are we missing? What do we need to make sure that we're pulling from other resources? Are there guidance documents that you or others have written that would be useful to include? So we'll ask you for that. A little bit more on IRIS Plus for anyone interested. Again, you can sign up either via the survey or via this link, and we'll post these slides at the end of the presentation on our website. So you can sign up there to provide feedback. You can also use that link to sign up to be involved in other themes. And as you can see, we have a number that are in development or will be soon. If this is for your first introduction to IRIS period, you are welcome to join one of our demo sessions. The next one is on October 20th, and we have a couple of different time zones accounted for there. You can use the link here. GIIN is a membership organization, so if you're interested in GIIN the GIIN membership, I've included a link here, although I'll note that all of IRIS Plus is a free public good, and so no membership required to use it currently. And then finally, we have done some initial work on impact performance and actually starting to understand within the agriculture space what impact looks like for different investments. And so if you're interested, I've included a link there. And with that, thank you all so much for joining us today. This is us. This is our contact information. Please reach out if you have questions or ideas. And we hope to see you in the next phases of building out this theme. Thank you.